Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly Facebook Live series here. Myself, I'm Emma Magee. I'm one of the educational psychologists here with Dyslexia Ireland, and I'm joined here by the lovely Sarah O'Connor. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about the different kind of the terminology, the jargon that you would often come across during an assessment, and especially in the psychology reports. So we want to just kind of go through what they are, what they mean. But before we do that, we just do a quick intro, if that's okay. So as I said, my name is Emma Magee. I'm one of the psychologists here in Dyslexia Ireland. So my role here is to do assessment for children and adults, and I do lots of courses as well for children, teachers and parents, and then this is kind of part of the role as well, just providing information for parents and teachers. So that's a little bit about me. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, and I'm one of the newer educational psychologists.
Maybe not that new.
That's nearly about a year now, yeah. And so I mainly work with children at the moment, doing assessment, but I'm also starting to develop webinars and training
courses,
as well.
Yeah.
So we'll be maybe jumping in on some of those, including some of the children's courses.
Perfect. Well, it's lovely to have you here today. Thank you. I think I might start us off actually by talking just a little bit about the different ways that we score some of the different subtests. So you might see in your report percentiles, standard scores, and confidence intervals. So I'll talk a little bit about what they are first. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to add a comment. If there's a word that you've come across in the report or the way in which the report is worded, do pop it in and we can answer away. And so the first one, as I said, the main two will be percentiles and standard scores. Within any psychology report, these are the two words that you'll come across an awful lot. To be honest, they're just two ways of saying the same thing. It's like having miles or kilometers. There's one isn't really any better than the other. A report might have one and not the other, or you might see both of them in a report. So if a percentile, for example, is if a child scores at the 50th percentile, they are smack bang in the middle of the average range, and they are scoring better than 50% of people their age, and they're scoring lower than 50% of people their age. If a child scores at the 75th percentile, they're scoring better than 75% of people their age. And there's 25% of people that are scoring higher than them. Isn't that right? Yes. So that's the percentile. The standard score is, again, this can kind of range from anywhere from like low scores of 30s and 40s right the way up to like 150. 100 again is bang in the middle for this one. And so you might see a standard score of 100, a standard score of 90, 105. They're all kind of roughly within the average range. A standard score anywhere in the 80s is below average. In the 70s is kind of lower again. A standard score anywhere between kind of 110 upwards is above average and higher. So again, if you wanted, there's visuals of these. If you were to Google these, and you'd be able to see a visual of them on a bell curve. Well, basically, your scores are going to be a standard score, percentile score, and they're the kind of the two main. They mean, it's like having miles versus kilometers. So two ways of saying the same thing. The confidence interval is another thing that you might see on a report. And this is kind of where, on any given day, you could score 100 standard score, which is bang in the middle of the average range. Now, the thing is that you could be having a bit of a bad day, you could be having a bit of a cold, or you could have, done a quick revision of spelling words in the car on your way there to the assessment, and one of the words came up, so you're having a really good day. So the confidence interval is like a little bracket between that 100 score, saying that on any given day, you could score anything between, say, 95 to 105, but today you just happen to be at 100. So it's that little bracket around it. and just takes into account any type of small differences, I suppose. So that's just a few of the 3 different scores that you get. I won't go into too much detail about, each one, but I think with regards, as I said, the standard scores around the hundreds is average, but the percentiles, it's around 50th percentile is the average range. Okay. I think now we're going to go into a little bit more detail about the actual tests that we use, because we like to use a lot of abbreviations, and sometimes we forget that the abbreviations can sound a bit unusual to other people. Perhaps maybe we might start off with some of the tests that we commonly use.
Well, the first one I suppose that we probably start with usually on the day would be the WIAT, or the WIAT.
Yes.
And that is the Westshire Individual Achievement Test. So that kind of looks at, again, achievement or attainment in a certain area. So we normally look at achievements in the likes of reading, or if they're in for a dyscalculia assessment, it would be numeracy.
Yeah.
So in terms of a dyslexia assessment, the main kind of test that we would start off then would be the word reading subtest. So that's just reading a list of words. They usually get a bit more complex as they go down the page. But what that kind of looks at is sight word recognition, or being able to recognize words or automatically.
Yeah.
So again, people with dyslexia might have a smaller number of words that they have automatically learnt off, or it's a bit more effort for them to kind of, it's not an automatic process. For things then like the next test that we kind of look at then would be around pseudo-word decoding, which is very similar to word reading, but this time you are reading nonsense words. So again, this is kind of looking at your child's ability to break down words or unfamiliar words. So if they were reading a passage and they came across a word that they've never seen before, how do they kind of go about breaking it down and sounding it out and blending all those sounds together? And
that's a really important one in dyslexia. Actually, out of all of them, that's one of the biggest ones within the WIAT.
Yeah, you tend to see a lot more errors in that kind of area. Then we do the bog standard spelling test. So it's very similar to what they would do in school anyway. So we'd give them a word and we'd use it in a sentence and then say the word again, just so they kind of know
the context.
The context of the word. And that's fairly straightforward. We're looking at kind of ability to get that phonological information out of to get it out of their head. Then we also look at, it's called reading fluency, and that kind of includes a couple of different scores. So when you look at the report, it's fluency, and then we also look at the accuracy. So when we were looking at fluency, we asked your child to read a passage or a story, and when we do that, we look at the accuracy and the speed at which they can read. So sometimes people who maybe would have dyslexia difficulties will have a few more errors than usual, like they might leave out a word, or they might blend sounds together incorrectly.
Skip a line, or add in a word.
Doesn't always change the meaning, but there tends to be a little bit more inaccuracies. And then in terms of, when we said we look at speed as well, sometimes people with dyslexia as well, they can be very accurate in their reading, but just it takes them an awful lot longer to kind of get to that. So again, accuracy and speed is important then for overall your fluency of reading. So then the next one we might do is around reading comprehension. So that's again, so reading a passage kind of out loud or to yourself. So it can be an advertisement, it can be a little short story, can be like a little instructions, and you're asked questions then based on it. So just again looking at understanding of text. And
actually a lot of kids with dyslexia can do quite well on that if they're given the time to read it, and they can go back over and find the answers in it. They can do quite well in the reading comprehension, but what we find actually is in the fluency tests, maybe they aren't very accurate, or they read quite slowly, but they're able to get a good understanding of it.
Yes, they have to get a good understanding. The comprehension is usually a byproduct of the fact that the reading is more difficult and they might make more errors, or again, when they guess words based on what they kind of look like, it can sometimes change the meaning of a story for them, so the comprehension can be affected by that. And sometimes then if children have a little bit of difficulty then with the likes of reading with passages, we can look at, or if it's a very young child, we can look at something like early reading skills instead. So that's again, it's more to do with, again,
They're phonics, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
identifying letters, beginning sounds, ending sounds. Can they recognize letters based on the sound? And those kind of things. So it's a bit more of a basic kind of again, like early skills.
And that one is called early reading skills. Yes, that's right.
But again, we don't use it too often, but it's mainly for younger children, or maybe children would have more difficulty actually reading a story. So if you think about your child and you think that there's no way they'd be able to read a story because they're having such difficulties with it, then maybe we would use a test like that instead.
Okay, so they're all the reading ones and the reading and the spelling ones. What about some of the phonic ones?
The phonic ones. So the main test we use with that is the comprehensive test of phonological processing, sort of CTOP.
Right, yeah, CTOP we like to call it.
So yeah, it's a great name, but it's a bit of a mouthful, so that's why we shorten it sometimes as well. So that kind of looks, again, skills to do with phonological processing or being able to process speech sounds, basically.
Okay.
People with dyslexia have a bit more difficulty with that. So we look at phonological awareness is the first test we kind of look at, which is being able to identify and manipulate sounds within words. So for example, we might have say a word and then take out a sound in the word, and what word is left over when you take out that sound.
Yes.
Can you combine sounds or letters to make blend sounds together to make a whole word, or can you just identify individual sounds within words?
Yeah. So like say cat without the k sound, or what does the word k at say, or together, like all of those type of, okay.
And again, we also look at then what's called rapid symbolic naming or rapid naming, which is again just how efficiently you can retrieve information from your long-term memory. So your phonological or sound-based information from your long-term memory. So children would usually be asked to read letters and numbers, and again, it's how quickly they can access that. So again, people with dyslexia can absolutely usually name all of them, but it just takes a bit longer in terms of processing or retrieving that information. So they're the main tests in terms of the phonological processing. I think you wanted to cover one or two extra maybe in terms of...
within the actual, what you also might see in other assessments might be one of the tests that we do is called the WASI, the Wechsler Abbreviated Scales of Intelligence. It's an abbreviated IQ test. Some others, or sometimes we also use the longer version of it, which is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children. Yes, that's called the WISC. And they, as I said, look at intelligence. Now, we don't usually focus on it too much because, as we know, there isn't that link between intelligence and dyslexia. But it is something that you might see within a psychology report, is the different areas of intelligence. So there's lots of different theories of intelligence. With the one that psychologists tend to use is that there's four main areas of intelligence. One is your verbal intelligence, and this can often be called Verbal Comprehension Index, or VCI. And that is your vocabulary, your use of language, your understanding of language, and your ability to explain and describe words. The other form of intelligence would be your non-verbal or your problem-solving skills. And this is often called Perceptual Comprehension Index, isn't it? Perceptual Reasoning Index, yeah. So it's P or I. And as I said, it's your problem-solving skills, being able to see a pattern and a sequence, kind of the skills that you would use if you were doing maths or putting an IKEA piece of furniture together, that non-verbal, like following the directions. There's one of the other areas of intelligence is called working memory. And now this is one that we do like to look at because actually in dyslexia, you can have difficulties with working memory. So working memory is your ability to hold and manipulate information in your short-term memory. So for example, how we look at it is reciting a series of numbers in forwards, in reverse order, and a sequential order. So it's the ability to hold or to see how many of those numbers can you hold in your short-term memory in that particular sequence. So that's your working memory.
And we can really look at its auditory working memory.
It's
so
auditory,
it's to do with the more verbal rather than the non-verbal. So again, Again, if you find that, remembering a long list of instructions, verbal instructions, those kind of things, it's kind of testing that capability, because again, it's more that verbal or phonological memory.
That's right, as opposed to the visual. Because you can have a visual working memory test, and it's like, how many pictures can you remember the size of? But yeah, we concentrate more on the auditory working memory. And there's another one as well called processing speed. I don't think we ever usually use this. It's how quickly can you carry out a task, particularly though a task that isn't literacy or numeracy related. It's very automatic. So again, people with dyslexia are generally fine with this. Then you might see in your report full scale IQ or FSIQ, and this is basically all 4 of those averaged. The problem with this is that sometimes, and we see this a lot in kids with dyslexia, they have a bit of a spiky profile. So you'll have really, really good visual, their verbal skills are great, their working memory might be quite low, and their processing speed be quite good. And that low working memory can often bring down that full scale IQ. And that's one of the reasons why as well that we don't like to use it's not really an accurate representation of that individual. So that's kind of all of the different tests, the subtests that we look at, including some of the names of the different tests that we use. And we've also, at the beginning, I talked just about a little bit about the different scores as well, the standard, percentile, and confidence interval. I mentioned as well about the bell curve. The bell curve is kind of, again, if you Google this, you'll see a picture of kind of a bell-shaped curve, and this is quite a standard graph, I suppose, that we would plot our scores along. And it kind of just gives it more, if you're more visual and you'd like to look at these scores in more of a graph format rather than, see them in written down, it can be nice to be able to see, okay, well, that's quite high and that's really, really low. So I think that's kind of, all of the different terminologies that we wanted to look through. Was there anything else? I think that we've kind of covered everything for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally on the day we might look at slightly different tests, and we will normally mention it to you on the day. Like, for example, there are tests of word reading where you can maybe have a time limit. Or again, sometimes you might bring out a processing speed. We'll always kind of explain why we are going to do that.
The TOWRY, isn't that one that we like to?
The TOWRY, so the test of word reading efficacy.
Yes, that's it. So another lovely abbreviation that we use. And
again, that's just reading a list of words, and there's a set time limit, so you have less than a minute to do it. So again, if we notice that maybe, for example, a child is reading through a list of words, but they're taking an awfully long time, sometimes it's just good to see how efficient that actually is. So again, it's just efficiency of word reading.
And in relation to applying for IRIS exemptions or things like that, these are some of the tests that are looked for. So when they say within the IRIS exemption that they will accept a test of word reading or spelling or reading comprehension, those are those tests that Sarah was talking about that are used. We talked about one particular brand called the WIAS, but there's other brands of tests as well that can be used. RAS is another one, so that's W or AT.
The wide-ranging achievement test.
That's it, yeah. And again, we have that here. We sometimes bring it out if if we're unsure about using the WIAS.
And that's often a test that they have in schools as well.
That's it, yeah.
If you're doing a school-based assessment for an Irish language exemption, that's often a test that they might have access to there. So again, they have a reading comprehension, a spelling, and a word reading as part of the RAT as well.
Right,
so that'd be a good one to check in with the school if that's if they have that available and you want to do a school-based assessment.
And like some of them, like there are pros and cons of some of these tests, and I suppose one of the main differences is that some of them can be used by anyone. Some of them you have to have special qualifications, and the majority of the time the schools would have copies of the RAS, the W or AT, and we would primarily, I think I prefer the WIAS. I think there's more in it. I think that it's more detailed.
And especially when you're going to be making recommendations for intervention and for support, I think there's a lot of information in it, which is where you're kind of gearing obviously when you come to a psychologist, you're looking for a bit more detail or a bit more information about where to go in terms of intervention.
Yeah.
So that's why we mainly use that one.
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose we'll leave it there for today. I think that's kind of all of the different jargony words that we often come across, and that you might come across as well in the report. If there's anything else, or if you've come across the names of any other tests, or you're not sure what is this test, what does it measure, feel free to send us a message, and we try and hopefully get back to you and try to kind of clarify some of those queries.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for joining us. And as I said, we are hoping to host these monthly Facebook Live sessions. So this was the first one, and on various different topics. And so you're going to be seeing a couple of the other members of staff here as well, doing various other topics. So do keep in touch. Keep, I suppose, following the Facebook page so you get to see what's coming up next. Okay?
And I suppose if there are any queries or areas that people are kind of having a lot of questions about, we could always set up a Facebook Live in the future on that particular topic.
Absolutely.
So I think we are looking at maybe covering, talking to children about dyslexia at one stage, and also what to do after an assessment, because often when you come in for a day, you get so much information, and then it's where do you even start?
It can be very overwhelming, definitely. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. It was lovely. Okay. And we'll see you then. Bye-bye.